Balance and stability are core concepts in human movement and martial arts. In this video, we'll be exploring what it is that makes or breaks your balance. There's a good chance that if you've ever been into a gym or martial arts dojo that you've heard one of the following expressions. You need to maintain your center. You need to sit on your punches more. You need to disrupt your opponent's center. You need to project your center forward more. You need to rotate around your center. All of these are referring to your center of mass. Your center of mass is the balance point within your body. Now, every object has a center of mass. It has a balance point. It has a point of rotation. The more mindful you are of this point, the better you are able to maneuver your body effectively. For simple objects, this point is fixed, but in the human body, it can move depending on the shape and form you take. In this video, I'll do my best to help you be able to identify this point and understand how it functions to improve the quality of your movement. Once we've touched on the relationship between base of support, center of mass, and line of gravity, we'll understand how balance and stability function. You can then apply that knowledge and understanding to your footwork, your stances, your techniques to improve them drastically. All human movement functions on fundamental principles. In this video, I will do my best to teach you what some of those foundational principles are and what their relationship is with one another in context. Before we get ahead of ourselves with these more complex human movement examples, let's go back to basics and look at some demonstrations. Let's take a look at balance. How does balance actually work? Let's go into that.
Let's talk about balance. Simply put, balance is achieved when your center of gravity is inside your base of support. Center of gravity is the point below the navel where your body balances evenly in all directions. Base of support are your points of contact to the floor, the wall, or any fixed point in space. Generally, the wider your base of support, or the lower your center of gravity, the easier it is to balance.
We just watched this short clip and it does an excellent job of introducing some of the basic concepts of balance, base of support, center of gravity. If the center of gravity is over the base of support, you're in balance. Excellent. Right, so the main problem comes in here where the center of gravity is not actually a fixed point. Many dojos, gyms, schools teach that the center of gravity is a fixed point just below your navel or just behind your navel. This is not actually the case. It moves depending on how your weight is distributed. So if you change the shape of your body, you still have to make sure that your center of gravity remains over your base of support. So if your legs come out, if you push both your legs coming forward, for example, the center of mass will move forward. If you don't adjust by perhaps pushing your hips back, your center of mass will move as your legs come forward. That means you will fall. So you have to compensate, you have to counterbalance. Because your center of mass moves depending on your weight distribution, that's where counterbalancing comes in. And if you take it as a fixed point, it's incorrect because it doesn't account for the balance point moving due to weight shifting and the body changing shape. We have a few videos in here that I've selected that explain this concept piece by piece in some different science demonstrations. I will also build on that in my video analysis to help you understand this more fully. This is a great little introductory, nice quick hits on the main points, but it's not 100% correct and it falls apart when you start analyzing movement in more detail because the center of mass or the center of gravity is not a fixed point, it moves. As you can see, the center of mass moves as the body changes shape. The Fosbury flop is an excellent example of this. Center of gravity is the average position of an object's weight distribution. You can also think of this as its balance point. For simple uniform objects, the center of gravity is located at the geometric center. That is to say that the middle or the center is the balance point. For irregular shapes and objects with uneven weight distribution, balance point, center of mass, or point of rotation can actually exist outside of the object. This dynamic 3D model does an excellent job of showing us how our center of mass shifts position. So as this body changes shape, the center of mass will shift accordingly relative to the body's weight distribution and positioning. So this movement is modeling a back handspring or continuous back handsprings where the center of mass is pivoting around the contact point of the floor. This is oppositional to how a back somersault or multiple back somersaults would be pivoting around the center of mass. Don't worry if this seems a little bit confusing to you now. Throughout the video I will introduce you to the fundamental principles that makes this all work, and we will build on them piece by piece, connecting them together until you have a good understanding of how human movement works. So you'll notice throughout this video I show you a wide range of different movements, including these backflips. And you might think to yourself, why is that? And it's because you need to understand how the center of mass correlates in different types of human movement. Only then will you properly understand balance and stability. One observation worth making here is notice how this little girl rotates almost perfectly in place around her center of mass. This man's technique is less efficient. He is pivoting his center around the contact point with the floor, whereas little girl was pivoting almost exclusively around her center of mass. This man's pivot is not as accurate. When an object is thrown with a torque or spin, it will always rotate around its center of mass. This is how a frisbee or golf disc works. It's how a human body rotates during a backflip. It's even how a boomerang or an axe rotates through the air when thrown. Personally, I find it quite fun to throw things like axes, knives, ninja stars. All of these rotate around the center of mass when thrown with a spin. Center of mass is relevant to all human movement. Another reason I use footage from a wide range of movement practices is to demonstrate the universal application of these principles. Okay, so here we have a young woman doing a remarkable display of balance, so balance and stability. So I'm going to pause and use various markers to help display what's happening. So we want to analyze this in terms of her base of support, which is here, I'm tapping in blue, her foot. So normally we can use our whole foot as our base of support, but you can see she's only actually using the ball of her foot, which is making her surface area of her base of support even smaller. So this is actually an extremely challenging thing to do because she needs to keep her center of mass, which we've discussed, which is the balance point of her body. She needs to keep her center of mass. I'm going to throw on another here. So we know that her center of mass needs to be vertically above her base of support. So her center of mass must be here somewhere above the base of support. It's probably about there. That's where her center of mass is probably sitting. And if it deviates outside of her base of support, say it was to go here, she would fall. So she is doing a remarkable job of not only keeping her center of mass in this tiny little base of support over here, she's doing it on an unstable surface, which is this Bosu ball. So any deviation of her center of mass is going to create an unstable reaction in the Bosu ball. So she needs to be even more precise in her control of her center of mass than she would be on the floor. And so yeah, again, remarkable show of balance. And while she's doing this, she's also moving her limbs. So you'll notice her body will shift slightly to the side, counterbalancing. So her left and right side are counterbalancing as her ankle makes adjustments to keep her center of mass there. So you can see she just lowered down, which increased her base of support. So she almost lost balance, so she increased her base of support. So we're going to have one quick look at this on fast forward again now. So I just want you to take note of how well she is maintaining control over her center of mass whilst on an unstable surface, also whilst changing her weight distribution. So she's changing the position of her body, meaning she's having to calculate and balance both sides of her body, front to back and side to side. So she's maintaining three-dimensional control of her center of mass over a small base of support whilst moving. Very impressive. The clips that I choose are very purposefully selected in an attempt to help you learn easier and faster. Each clip tries to exemplify a specific principle or trait that I want to help you notice and understand. Once you understand a principle in one movement, it's much easier to visualize, apply, and extrapolate that understanding to others. So in the words of the renowned samurai and master swordsman Miyamoto Musashi,
"To know 10,000 things, know one well."
it is my belief that in order to know many things, it is best to spend time learning and understanding the fundamental principles that connect those things. If you don't know how to balance a rock, I strongly recommend pausing the above clip as it changes and reading the tips, because it will give you extraordinary insights into the nature of balance and stability for something so seemingly simple. The same concept of balancing this rock can be applied to balancing on one foot. Our foot is also a tripod. So finding a point for your center of mass to sit within your base of support is all it takes to find a point of balance. Stability factors in the ability to resist disturbance. That we'll talk about in more detail later. The human foot is in essence a tripod itself. It is engineered to be a lot more adaptable, but the principle of balancing and finding stability on your foot, especially if standing on one foot, remains very much the same as balancing this rock. Our feet are quite literally the foundation on which our structure and balance stand. So we're going to spend a moment and just cover a quick overview of how they function. So one of the most important design elements we're going to focus on quickly is the fact that the human foot is designed in essence like a tripod. Now the structure of the bones, ligaments and connective tissue are arranged in a fashion that makes use of the properties of arches. Now the study of the human foot can be quite in-depth. I don't want to go into too much detail, but what I do want you to take note of is that the human foot is in essence a tripod, and it is arches that give it its fundamental properties. The structure of the human foot is very unique in the sense that it can adapt depending on the terrain and the forces applied to it. So the structure of the arches can actually change shape to be more efficient at dealing with different terrains, slopes, angles, irregularities, and even different angles of force and weight. It's an amazing structure. The arches in the human foot have several adaptive functions related to balance, stability, force generation, and shock absorption. Here's a brief explanation for each. Balance. The arches help maintain balance by distributing weight across the foot. The arches act as flexible structures that dynamically adjust to different surfaces and terrains, providing stability and preventing the foot from rolling excessively. Stability. The arches enhance stability by acting as natural shock absorbers that distribute forces during walking, running, and other weight-bearing activities. They help to evenly distribute the body's weight on the floor as well as through the anatomical structures of the foot and lower extremities, reducing the risk of injury or strain. Force generation. The arches aid in force generation by effectively storing and releasing energy during locomotion. As the arches compress and stretch with each step, they accumulate and release elastic energy, creating a spring-like mechanism that contributes to efficient movement and propulsion. Shock absorption. By serving as organic and adaptive shock absorbers, the arches are essential for shock absorption. They help absorb and dissipate the impact forces generated during activities such as jumping or running, reducing the strain on bones, joints, and soft tissues.
Foot arch is able to adapt to differing surfaces, behave as a shock absorber, and also stiffen up to propel the body forward during the push-off phase of each step. The muscle, plantar fascia, ligaments, and tendons in the feet all form a robust base in the form of an arch in which all this can occur. We could therefore think of the foot arch as a foundational pillar of the body.
The height of your arch, or lack thereof, is not a determining factor in foot health for a large majority of people. It's all about how the arch functions, not its appearance. Having low arches doesn't automatically lead to foot problems. However, having low arches in weak feet can. So a lot of people that think that they have flat feet often just have low arches that are very mobile and flexible, and they would benefit from things that strengthen their foot. You see, going barefoot more often can enhance your foot stability, and better foot stability leads to better lifting technique as a whole. You see, when you cram your toes together within a narrow shoe, it's far easier to lose foot control and allow the knee to cave in as well. But if we're able to spread your toes out by going barefoot or wearing a shoe that mimics going barefoot, the foot can function as it was designed, maintain better stability, better arch control, and therefore less room for knee instability. The transition to going barefoot more often and wearing barefoot style shoes is something that I promise you can benefit your life.
Walking barefoot is one of the most simple and effective ways of strengthening and mobilizing your feet. Because take a look at the rocks. As we walk over the rocks here, notice how the whole foot is molded and shaped and is dynamic in the way that we move. This helps strengthen and mobilize the feet and ankles.
In summary, the adaptive function of the foot's arches is essential for efficient and safe movement as well as for balance and stability. I'm going to end off this section with some words of wisdom gained through some personal difficult experiences. If you want to be an elite level athlete, taking care of your feet is essential. Spending a little time and effort making sure your feet function properly could change the course of your entire career. I'll go so far as to say it could make or break your career. I personally suffered numerous strains, tears of ligaments, tendons, muscles, and even cartilage. And the root cause of most of my injuries was dysfunctional arches or dysfunctional feet from modern shoes and hip imbalance, which tends to be a bit of a chicken and egg scenario of which comes first. They're strongly linked. Look after your feet. My ignorance of foot health and function didn't cost me months. It cost me years of my athletic career. I'm not telling you this to be a crybaby. I'm telling you this because I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I made. Be smart. Prioritize the core principles of movement and be consistent in body maintenance to ensure good function. You'll learn faster, you'll have better performance, you'll have much fewer injuries. Alright, so that's my words of wisdom. Take it or leave it, but I strongly recommend you take it.
No, just connecting. My body now is just snapping into the line of my intention.
One more excellent and relevant quote before we move on is by one of the greatest minds of our time, Elon Musk, and he said,
boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. Through most of our life, we get through life by reasoning by analogy, which essentially means kind of copying what other people do with slight variations.
Now, this analogous way of learning is extremely useful. It's pretty much monkey see, monkey do. But it's not really comparable to having an understanding of the firm principles that make something work. Instead of being a monkey see, monkey do situation, you can be a monkey do with having never seen. You can be creative. To me, both of these quotes really hit home on the importance of learning fundamental principles, and that is my approach to coaching and teaching. Focus on understanding the principles. Everything else will come much easier then. So I recommend seek to understand the principles of movement, and learning techniques becomes easy. You'll even understand techniques you've never been taught within moments of seeing them. So without further ado, let's move on and learn some cool stuff. Line of gravity and identifying center of mass by suspension. This works even if the object's center of mass is found outside of the object's physical structure.
That the center of mass, which acts like a point, will always fall exactly below the vertical line of the string. Well, if I have an object like this, and the center of mass may be somewhere here, I could hang it like this, and then the center of mass, if I damp out all the oscillations, must lie exactly on the vertical, somewhere on this vertical line, I don't know where, somewhere on this vertical line. I now suspend it from here, and the center of mass must again be somewhere along the vertical line, and so where the two intersect, which is somewhere here, there is the center of mass. It's a nice way to determine the center of mass of some crazy object. This is not so crazy, but I can make it crazy. Suppose I take my bracelet off and I put my bracelet here on one side. Now it's a crazy object. Now it's clear that the center of mass is shifting in this direction. And notice, this vertical line now goes through here. So somewhere here is the center of mass. And if I now suspend it from here, the center of mass must also fall below this line, and where the two intersect, that is where the center of mass is.
Have you ever tried to balance an object on your fingertip? Notice how if you're even a little off center, the object will fall. When you're successful, what you've done is place your fingertip directly below the object's center of mass. The center of mass of an object is basically the middle point of the weight of the object, which we can identify by considering how an object's mass is distributed. For simple shapes, the center of mass is the precise center of the object. For these simple shapes, there are equally simple mathematical equations describing how to locate the center of mass. For example, for a sphere, You can find the center of mass by finding the center of the sphere, or its centroid. And the same would apply for a cube, where the center of mass is located in the geometric center of the object. This happens because these objects are symmetric. Our own bodies also have a center of mass, but the complex shapes of our body segments make this more difficult to calculate. To solve for this, we can locate the center of mass experimentally, just like we did when we tried to balance the object on our fingertip. By balancing the body on a plank and shifting the plank back and forth to find the balance point, we can estimate the location of the center of mass.
When forces are unequal, they are out of balance. Like this. When forces are equal, they are balanced. Like this.
In the human body, the exact location of the center of mass depends on where the segments of our body are in space. That means the center of mass moves around as we move. But generally, when in a standing position, the center of mass is found just below the belly button. That is, around the second sacral, or L5 vertebra. Another related concept that you may have heard is the center of gravity. These two terms are usually used interchangeably, and that is because in a uniform gravitational field, like the Earth's surface, the center of mass and center of gravity are at the same position. Knowing the center of gravity can help us understand how a person maintains balance. For example, for a person who is standing still, balancing easily, downward projection of their center of gravity should be inside their base of support, meaning within the area outlined by any body parts we have in contact with the ground, usually 1 or 2 feet. Since the center of mass moves around as we move our body or attain different postures, the center of gravity moves as well. The farther your center of gravity is from the center of your base of support, the less stable you will be. This is a fundamental principle of static balance. We can maintain balance in a dynamic sense as well, though. The center of gravity can move outside the base of support, but in order to avoid falling, we must be able to synchronize our movements. For example, during gait, as we push off our back leg, we temporarily put our center of gravity outside our base of support. Then, we automatically move our backward leg forward in a natural step in order to put our center of gravity back inside our base of support, achieving dynamic balance.
The timing of the synchronization of your steps during walking or running is so precise that even a fraction of a second delay on your next step will almost immediately start a fall. Now, you might be able to recover if you aren't going very fast, have really good reflexes, or if the disturbance is very minor, but it really doesn't take much to put even the best of athletes down. This is because most of our running and walking patterns are designed to be highly energy economical, but this also inherently puts our centers of mass moving forward over and beyond our base foot with every step. If our trailing leg doesn't quickly overtake our center of mass between steps, we fall. We need to re-establish that base. Later in this video, I will give you examples of walking patterns that don't follow this default. They are far more balanced and suited for unstable terrain and some martial arts or sports-specific movements. This increase in stability comes at the cost of mobility. There's always a trade-off.
In our daily life, the center of mass and center of gravity can help to determine our ability to maintain balance, whether static or dynamic.
Now, does the center of gravity always reside inside the body, or can it be outside of the body? It can be outside. Yeah? Okay. So, if I have a ring, and I take it, and I do this, and I then support this to the ceiling and I leave go, what's going to happen? It's always going to do that, right? Because that's the vertical center of gravity on this. Does that make sense? Yep. If I take a second string and I suspend it here, where's the actual center of gravity between those 2 points of support? Somewhere within the... Exactly in the middle, between the two supports. Does that make sense? What if I go here? Where's the center of gravity now? If I wanted to hang it like that. Yep. That's the center of gravity. Problem is I don't have anything there. That's why wheels need spokes. Does that make sense? So that is a classic example of a center of gravity residing outside of a shape.
To help clarify this, if you wanted to suspend this hoop perfectly horizontal, close to how he's holding it now, you would actually have to suspend it from a point that is vertically above the center of mass. The hoop could be suspended from any height vertically above the center of mass. However, if you tried to suspend it on a point that was not vertically above the center of mass, the hoop would be unbalanced. It would be lopsided and skew, and it would place uneven tension on the suspension cables. The center of gravity being the balance point, it is also the point of rotation, which is what allows you to control a somersault, backflip, or spinning tornado kick. To get really good at these things, you also need to be able to control angular momentum, which we'll talk about at a later time. With practice, you can get very good at judging where your own and your opponent's center of mass is at any given point in time. That being said, I will give you some approximations in different body types. For example, in this picture we have a male, female, and toddler. So a woman will usually have a lower center of gravity than a man. This is because women on average have larger hips, wider hips, and narrower shoulders. This means they have more weight lower down and less weight higher up, lowering their center of mass. Men, on the other hand, tend to have narrower hips and wider shoulders, along with a larger degree of upper body mass, resulting in a higher center of mass or center of gravity, as we can use these terms interchangeably for our purpose. Babies and infants tend to have a higher center of gravity because they have larger heads proportionally to their body that they have yet to grow into. The reason this is so important is because it changes the way you do martial arts techniques. People of different body types need to adapt techniques to their own body type or to their opponent's body type. For example, someone throwing a kick with very short legs cannot replicate the same technique of someone doing the same kick with long legs. Right, so in this picture we have the three basic body types. Now I'll give you a very quick overview here. So we've got ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph as the three categories. An ectomorph is someone that usually is taller, thinner, lower percent body fat, narrower hips, narrower shoulders. They tend to struggle to pick up muscle mass. A mesomorph, on the other hand, tends to be someone with a more athletic frame. They naturally tend to carry a bit more muscle, narrower hips, wider shoulders. An endomorph is someone that usually has wider hip ratio and a heavier set frame, tend to carry more body fat. Now each of these different body types will have a different center of mass and thus should utilize martial art techniques differently. For example, it would be much harder to throw an endomorph with a judo throw than it would be to throw an ectomorph. With training, you will drastically improve your body awareness and learn how to efficiently move around your center of mass. You will also learn how to gauge your opponent's center of mass in different positions as your spatial reasoning also improves. This will allow you to manipulate your opponent's body effectively in various ways. Let's do a quick recap. So center of gravity is the point at which all parts of an object are equally balanced. Standing upright, our center of gravity is around our navel. The center of gravity changes depending on what position the body is in. Key. The center of gravity can lie outside of an object. Important. Generally, the lower the center of gravity, the more stable an object will be. Let's connect the three main concepts of this video together now. Center of gravity, line of gravity, and base of support. Line of gravity. The vertical line that passes through the center of gravity to the ground. The line of gravity is important when determining the stability of an object. If the line of gravity falls within an object's base of support, the object is relatively stable. Here we have someone doing a remarkable job maintaining dynamic balance on a unicycle. Now, as I'm sure you are aware, a unicycle is inherently unstable. It has a very small contact surface with the ground, and in order to move on it, you actually have to enter into a state of falling to create momentum. You then need to quickly counteract the falling torque with either pedal torque or by counterbalancing your weight whilst holding under the seat to be able to apply the force. You have to make constant corrections to keep your center of mass over the small base of support. Definitely easier said than done.
You got this, Logan.
Base of support is the area within an object's point of contact with the ground. In human movement and martial arts, it's important to understand that every step you take changes your base of support and changes how well balanced you are and how stable you are. With a little bit of practice, you'll know how to set up your base of support and your center of mass to maximize your balance, improve your stability, and dynamically adapt them to perform all sorts of awesome techniques like you see online. What makes or breaks every single technique you see is whether or not it adheres to center of mass, line of gravity, and base of support. Understanding these concepts allows you to learn so much faster. It allows you to self-correct, analyze, and improve at a rate that's just not comparable to someone that just tries to learn techniques. You have to have an understanding of the underlying concepts if you want to learn quickly, effectively, avoid injuries, and actually reach a high level of skill. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't train technique. Everybody has to train technique. Through repetition, we really refine our skills. But if you never question the techniques and try to understand the concepts of what makes the techniques effective or not effective, your martial arts is going to be weak, and your learning process is just going to be snail slow. So, jokes aside, having techniques is great. They are tools in your toolbox, but understanding techniques makes you a creative and adaptive problem solver. Next up, we're going to take a look at center of pressure and then some science demonstrations to illustrate what we've learned.
The point where the line of gravity touches the ground is called the center of pressure. Now, the reason that point is important is that in order to determine balance for an object, whether an object will tip over or not, is to see whether the center of pressure is inside the base of support.
Let's recap with some practical demonstrations.
Center mass describes if you measure the mass of all parts of an object and try and find where the average is of all the mass and balance that, that's the center mass. It turns out that the center mass is the balance point in each axis of an object. This Coca-Cola bottle is balanced horizontally here on the piece of wood because combined their center of mass is right over the bottom, the footprint here. So it stays still. It's pretty cool. So for something to not fall over, its center of mass has to be directly above where it's balanced. So this is a wooden block, and it's got a big copper chunk of metal in here that makes it heavy in the bottom. So now as I raise it up in the air, you can see that it stays pretty stable and it doesn't fall over. It starts to slide eventually. But if we flip it upside down now, watch for when this starts to tip. When the center of mass of the block begins to no longer be above the footprint and it starts to be above the side, the block should fall over. So as we tip it, the center mass now is getting close and it's soon going to be over the edge of the block. Boom, fell over. So the center mass for something has to be above its footprint or it's going to fall over. So here we have the Leaning Tower of Physics. And its center mass is still above its footprint, above its base, so it's not going to tip over. I can add pieces and make it higher here, but it's still not falling over. Its center mass is still above its base. And if I'm careful and keep adding pieces just right, its center mass is still stable. Here's the tricky one. And it's still stable. The center mass is just barely on this side of the baseline here. So it's still over the base. But if I put any more on top, the Leaning Tower of Physics falls over.
Next, we'll look at how an object is affected when applying forces relative to its position of center of mass. This is very important in martial arts and combat sports.
These two ice cubes are connected by a thin rod, and the center of mass of the system is indicated by the black dot. When I apply a force on the rod to the left of the center of mass of the system, the applied force rotates the system. When I apply a force on the rod to the right of the center of mass of the system, the applied force rotates the system in the other direction. And then, when I apply a force on the rod at or directly toward the center of mass of the system does not rotate. In other words, if you apply a force to an object at or directly toward its center of mass, The force applied will not cause the object to rotationally accelerate. The force will only cause a linear acceleration of the object.
This domino is standing up. But if we push it up here, it will fall over because its center of gravity gets past this corner. Now, when that happens, the domino is moving in a circle. Weird, huh? Everything, no matter what its size or shape, has a center of gravity, even this refrigerator. So watch. If I push here, right through the refrigerator's center of gravity, it slides along the floor without tipping. The forces are in balance. But if I push up here, the pushing force becomes a twisting force, and the refrigerator starts to turn around that corner down there. If I keep going, the weight of the refrigerator acting through the center of gravity takes over, and the refrigerator goes over. Everything, no matter what its size or shape, has a center of gravity.
In a later video, I'll expand on how this relates to 1. Leverage and moment arms, 2. Torque, 3. Angular momentum, and 4. Conservation of angular momentum. These principles will help you maximize the effectiveness of your force outputs. Now, you might not fully appreciate how impactful that little concept right there is. It's a game changer. It's right at the core of all your movement, especially impactful for kicks, throws, sweeps. Alright, so we're going to continue to go into this so you get a good functional understanding of how to apply these concepts to your own training. So I decided to do a video for you to help you understand and visualize balance. So we were talking about center of mass, base of support, the connection points to the ground, and line of gravity. Line of gravity being the point, the vertical point or vertical line that runs through the center of mass, which is the point, balance point or point of rotation in the body. So here my center of mass is roughly in the middle of my body, slightly beneath my belly button. As you can see, I'm clearly in balance. I'm not falling over. However, if I have to lean forward, I can only lean to the point that my center of mass leaves my base of support. So my feet, I got pretty big feet, give me a roughly, a decent sized base of support that I can play inside of. If I keep my body rigid, there's less play that I have. Because you'll see, if I keep my spine straight, my body rigid, there is my base of my center of mass, leaving my base of support. There it leaves. Doesn't matter how strong you are. You can be Hercules. When your center of mass leaves your base of support, we will fall. It's just physics. Nothing to do with strength. Alright, so there you can see center of mass leaves my base of support. If I'm very rigid, it happens sooner. If I allow my body to be adaptive, I can counterbalance. So as, for example, my shoulders go back, I can allow my hips to go forward, hips and knees to go forward, and now you can see I can change the shape of my body and still maintain balance with the same base of support. In this video, I mapped out the base of support's vertical expanse, so where the center of mass can remain to stay in balance, to show you how the center of mass moves and how that relates to the balance point. The key moment for getting back on your feet is knowing when your center of mass has gone above your base of support again. People that lack the mobility to execute this bend properly will use momentum to help transfer their weight from their hands to their feet to get back above their base of support. This is seen as a rocking motion from front to back to create the momentum. It's a viable way to compensate to still accomplish the end result. These principles of balance are applicable to all human movements. I've selected a few movements that are visually interesting to demonstrate this. Whilst significant functional strength and mobility are required to perform these feats, they are all fundamentally balanced skills. It's important to note that all visual aid markers that I've placed are approximations. The center of mass is also the point of rotation. Note here, the handstand push-up is not a straight up and down movement. The feet go back as the head comes forward. This is a counterbalancing, allowing you to lower yourself towards the floor. This clip here introduces us to a principle we have not yet discussed. Looking at the two performers individually, what they are doing is physically impossible without the other. When interpreting this kind of balance, it is extremely useful to apply the principle of joint center of mass. The joint center of mass refers to the point where the masses of connected objects or systems is concentrated. When multiple objects are connected or linked together, the mass of the whole system can be considered to be concentrated at a single point, known as the joint center of mass. In this clip, the bodies of the two performers are connected, essentially making them one body for the purpose of balance. Each is counterbalancing the other around the joint center of mass. This is an excellent display of fine-tuned teamwork. The more you see these principles in action, the more you start to recognize the patterns in all movement. The commonalities are always there if you know how to look. True greatness requires mastery of these principles. Here Anderson Silva gives us an excellent showing of his phenomenal understanding of human movement and fight IQ, both of which have a huge component of pattern recognition contained within them. This is a masterful display of understanding of balance, stability, reach, angles, reflexes, patterned responses using baits and counters, fluidity of motion, creativity, and I'll say it straight up badassery. The application of all technical skill and the foundation of applying any God-given talent or natural attributes all lies on your ability of balance and stability. Your offense, your defense, your footwork, your head movement, everything is derived from your balance and stability. Now I know I'm hitting this over and over and over again, but it kills me that this is not better taught. So you need to get these foundational principles completely locked in and maintained with practice. Let's get back to the foundational basics and take a deeper look at weight shifting in another dimension. Doing some more examples of balance. We touched on balance front to back, where the base of support is very narrow. It's only the width of my feet, front to back. Counterbalancing a stiff body, we touched on this already. So I obviously, if I plant my feet nice and wide, my base of support is the width of my feet, which is roughly so big, but I now have much more length. So you can see I can move my center of mass, which is roughly approximately here, quite far laterally from side to side without actually falling over. This is because I'm still maintaining my center of mass and my line of gravity inside my base of support. I can push it all the way over here. Now my center of mass is just before this foot. I know this because if I lift this foot, I'm still going to fall that way. But if I shift here and I push on my toes, I'm not quite there yet, I go in a little bit more. Okay, now I can feel my center of mass is actually coming over this foot. Shift, push, because now I can lift this foot and I don't fall. That is how we know we are in balance. I've shifted my center of mass from a double base of support, having this entire area to work inside of. I shifted it all the way to one side until it came on top of this foot. That way I no longer need this contact. I need this foot's contact, which gives me all this area of base of support. Because as soon as that foot comes up, none of this is my base of support. Not just that, none of this is my base of support anymore. I now have to maintain my center just in the perimeter of this foot. All right, so that's how your base of support works, shifting from 2 feet to 1 foot. Now, obviously, this works when you're walking, when you're running, doing all your actions, and when you're boxing. See, your center of mass has to stay inside your base of support at all times if you want to remain on balance. So even when you're shifting your weight, you want to shift your weight to the balance point on your one leg if you want to remain balanced. So I can bring this leg in underneath my center of mass, allows me to lift my other leg and maintain balance. Boom, then I can throw a kick. You can manipulate balance and intentionally fall. Now this is where a lot of people think in martial arts you have to be on balance all the time. It's not the case. There are times where you absolutely want to lose balance. You intentionally fall. Because falling creates a lot of energy. You can capitalize on gravitational acceleration of your mass and then put out a strike. This is what it means to sit on your punches. Boom, boom, boom. A variation of this concept is used to project your center of mass past your base of support to capitalize on gravity. So they come onto their balance point, their base of support, shift their center of mass onto their base of support with a bit of acceleration, and then they expand over that and extend their kick while they would technically be falling. Movement, more range of motion to accelerate and expand. Boom. I can't do explosive kicks now, I'll pull a muscle, but I'll give you a rough idea. So instead of just doing a balanced kick where I'm here, boom, you can see I can still extend my hip, get a bit of reach, boom, but it's not the same, it won't have the same momentum as if I go, this is Spartan kind of kick. So you intentionally lose your balance in a line of orientation. You can project your center of mass to give you more energy. All right, so there's many topics we can touch on. I don't want to get too in depth in any one of them. Still focusing on center of mass. I hope you're learning something. We're going to end off there. Great. Cheers. I have a nasty suspicion someone's going to interpret what I just said is balance is not important if you want power, and that is not what I said. What I said is you can intentionally shift your center of mass outside your base of support to capitalize on gravitational accelerations. The same thing as dropping your center of mass, bending your knees, bending your hips to drop your center of mass to gain gravitational acceleration, or shifting your center of mass outside your base of support to create a fall in a purposeful fall in a specific direction to gain momentum that you're going to use. That's different to just having shit balance. Stability. So I gave you a quick description on balance. Let me give you a quick description of stability, because they are not the same thing. So balance is having a center of mass, line of gravity inside your base of support, you're not falling. Line of gravity inside base of support, not falling. Line of gravity outside of base of support, falling. Okay, balance. All right, so looking at stability. Stability is how much resistance do you have? What is your ability to resist disruption without losing your balance? So how much impact force can I take? Boom, and still be balanced? Or how much does it take to knock me off balance? That is your stability. If you can resist energy, you have good stability. Alrighty, so we've got 3 slides we need to get through quickly to summarize some key information. Slide number 1. 4 fundamental factors that affect stability. Number 1, low center of mass. The lower the center of mass, the higher the stability. Number 2, size of the base of support. The larger the base of support, the higher the stability. Number 3, line of gravity's position relative to the base of support. So let's expand upon that quickly. If your center of mass and hence your line of gravity is inside your base of support, you are in a state of balance, you are balanced. But if your center of mass goes outside your base of support, that means your line of gravity will also be outside your base of support, you are falling, you are out of balance. Okay, we can take that a step further, which means if your center of mass is right on the edge of your base of support and a force pushes or pulls you in the direction that you're on the edge of, you're going to fall quite easily, which means you have very little stability in that direction. So we can see that the position of your center of mass relative to your base of support, or where your center of mass and line of gravity is compared to where your feet are, your base of support is going to determine how much stability you have and in what direction. If you're right on the edge, you can get pushed over very easily. But if you're right on the edge and something pushes you the opposite direction, you've got a lot of room inside your base of support. Your center of mass can travel all the way to your other foot. And if your feet are quite far apart, that's a lot of distance, increasing your stability significantly. So where your center of mass is relative to your base of support matters. To summarize, your stability is a quantity that exists within a context, and that context is the situation and circumstance, your body setup, and the environmental factors, including force direction. Number 4, increased body mass or inertia. The heavier something is, the more inertia it has by the nature of its mass, making it harder to move or requiring more force to move, inherently increasing its stability. Alright, so we had a quick look at what the main or the fundamental factors are that affect stability. Now we're going to have a quick look at what the primary situational factors are. So these are like usually your environmental factors. If you're fighting in combat sports or a cage, it'll be largely the floor surface. So we're going to take a look at the properties of the supporting surface, basically the floor. And number 1 we're going to take a look at is friction or traction. And so, for example, if you're on ice, you're not going to have the same friction and traction and the ability to drive and move your feet and your center of mass compared to something like tar. When I say tar, I don't mean the liquid tar, I mean like concrete or tar that roads are tarred with. It's, you know, a very firm, hard surface, coarse, gives you good traction. You can move and shift and drive yourself very effectively. Now, like I was saying, we're talking about combat sports specifically. If the canvas, the type of material, if you're wearing shoes like in boxing or in other combat sports where you wear shoes, if the surface of the floor and the surface of your shoe, if that doesn't have like a coefficient or a good correspondence with traction, you can be slipping and sliding all over the place. I'll add a little bit of footage just to show you. There was a boxer that went into a ring, and the type of sole of shoe he had no traction. I don't know if it was a fixed fight and they gave him shoes like that on purpose, or if someone it was a very unfortunate accident that they put him in shoes that just did not have any traction on the type of canvas of the ring. It was ridiculous to watch. I feel so bad for that guy. He was in at such a disadvantage because of lack of traction. Another thing that can affect friction and traction is sweat. Anyone that's trained in combat sports will have probably slipped and slid in human sweat on the mats more times than they can count. I've slipped completely off my feet and fell on my elbow, on my back, on my knees, on my hips, on my everything because of sweat. So friction is a major thing that's going to be a situational factor that's going to affect your stability. Let's go number 2. So supporting surface durability. This is another big thing. If the floor is very soft, you're not going to be able to have the same ability to drive into it, to shift your mass. If you've ever tried to play fight on a mattress or on a bouncy castle, this should be clearly evident to you. You know? If the floor is very soft, you don't have good drive. The floor absorbs a lot of your force application into it. You don't get the same ground reaction force. And if it's very soft and bouncy, again, it's going to affect your stability major. So if a very soft floor in combat sports, if you're used to training on wooden floors or hard floors and you go train on a very, very soft judo floor, some dojos have very, very soft floors, you are not going to be able to perform the same. Like, it's a big deal. Sometimes you fight in a ring that has a very, very cushioned floor, and if you're used to training in a dojo that doesn't have cushions or something, your ability to move is going to be very hampered in the first round. You'll probably start to adjust after the first, second round, but the floor durability does play a big role in stability. And moving on to inclination of the floor, so that's number 3, inclination of the floor. Yeah, we're just talking about slopes and abnormalities and deviations. For example, if you step on a rock or something that's going to interfere with your stability majorly, you're not likely to encounter something like that in the ring, but yeah, it is a situational factor we need to be aware of. Alright, so we looked at fundamental factors, we looked at our situational factors. Now the last slide, number 3, we're looking at our subjective or individually specific factors that influence our stability. Alright, so number 1, biomechanical alignment. It's pretty straightforward. Is your body structure correctly aligned to amplify your strength or leverage your strength, and is it aligned to resist the force that's being applied upon you? Number 2, so sufficient muscular strength. Again, do you have the strength necessary to resist whatever is trying to disrupt your stability? Do you have the muscular strength on the joint angle? So joint angle again comes into play. So when you're looking at arm wrestling, you don't arm wrestle with your arm out here because you're not going to have the same strength application. The goal when someone arm wrestles is usually to bring it in tight here and then pull across and down. You have better leverage. You can apply your strength better. So again, do you have sufficient muscular strength, and again, is your alignment good? So if your alignment's good, your strength will be better, or your ability to apply and leverage your strength will be better. And third point in here, coordinated muscle activation patterns, so movement patterns. Are your movement patterns good? Are your muscles sequencing in the correct order? Is your muscular timing good? It pretty much comes out to summation of forces. Are you moving well? Is everything graceful and aligned and synergistic and working together? Or are your movements clunky, and are you wasting energy, and is the turning of your hip not well timed with the turning of your shoulder, and you're not actually getting a proper weight transfer, and you're not moving kinetic energy through the kinetic chain? So it comes down to, are your movement patterns clean and crisp? This is going to affect your stability. It's also going to majorly influence your ability to leverage your strength and put out power in your strike. So huge for all sports applications, and wrestling and kickboxing, striking martial arts. And 4, let me not talk too much, variability of disturbance force. So the direction and magnitude that the force is coming at you from, again, this is a huge subjective factor. You know, it will differ. Every situation, the force is coming from a different direction. In a boxing match, you're getting hit from different angles. In a wrestling match, the guy is coming at you from different angles, different heights, different levels. Rugby, American football, you know, the force factors vary. So these are major subjective variance factors, and yeah, I'm not going to delve into that more than, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like, not necessarily, I know sometimes I really like to get into the detail of things and think it through, but let me not kick a dead horse here. I'm sure you get that one, so let's move on. That is your stability. If you can resist energy, you have good stability. If you have a wide base, you can resist energy more because you've got more play inside your base of support. The taller you are, the more resistance will leverage is another concept, it will leverage against your point of contact with the floor and knock you over. That's why if someone pushes you high up, especially up here on your shoulders where you've got quite a lot of rigidity, especially if you're very stiff and your base of support is narrow, and someone pushes you on the shoulders, you will fall over very easily. Especially if your feet are together, you can see, as soon as someone pushes you, over. If you're on one foot, one finger, someone pushes you, over. Okay, so you'll have less and less stability the smaller and smaller your base of support gets. The higher your center of mass is relative to your base of support, the more unstable you are because of leverage of rotation against your base of support. So if you want to increase your stability, widen your base of support, drop your center of mass. Now in this direction here, I'm now very stable. I can resist a lot of energy. Especially if I do like a front stance, if I were planting a spear, I could resist a horse charge theoretically. Boom! Plant that in. This is very stable position. If we were playing rugby, American football, running, if you're coming in, I'm going to plant myself low and drop. This is also like a wrestler's position. Wrestler's position is very stable front to back. Also quite stable side to side. Relatively wide base of support. Gives me a little bit of room to move from side to side. More on this diagonal and front to back. Okay, so we've got our base of support and stability. What else do I want to tell you about stability? My balance point, or rather I can maintain my balance point and change my shape. Give you another angle. Let's stay at this angle here. So you can see I can change my balance point, or rather I can maintain my balance point and change my shape. Whoop. So as long as my body tension and alignment is good and it holds true, I can balance my center of mass and not fall. Now,
Take a look at this. It's our balance meter stick of science. And right now, we have the same amount of weight, the same distance from the center, and it's in balance. Watch what happens when we put twice as much weight on one side. Well, it's out of balance until we put this one over here. And look. 2 times the weight, 2 times the distance. And it's in balance. We can do it with 3 times as much weight. Look, 3 times the distance from the center and 3 times as much weight. And it balances. See, now whenever the stick moves, notice that every place on the stick is moving in a circle. Now when a force makes something move in a circle, we call it a twisting force or a torque. So the torque from this one weight equals the torque from these 3 weights. And they're in balance. Of course, now they're out of balance. Sorry.
Rather than watching me do a mediocre job of demonstrating this, let's see some clips of 2 people doing an excellent or high level example of this. Much more interesting, much more impressive, and it really illustrates the point.
We go step, lace under, shift on your supporting leg, tilt over, and stretch. If you're a little bit more flexy, you can grab your ankle and let that body tilt over here. Come up nice and steady with a neutral spine to have a clean landing no matter where you are. You're gonna come to a passe and close 5th position.
Balance, the art of not falling. Stability, the art of resisting disruption. Stability is relative to orientation. It's relative to your base of support, the position of your center of mass. It's not just one quantity. Stability in this direction is far less because the base of support is much narrower. There's less room to reposition the center of mass within the base of support. Whereas if we look at the length of the base of support, it's much longer than it is wide, giving us more room to shift inside. So you can see I can shift my center of mass far forward and far back. There's a lot of space in this direction of my base of support. See, I can shift far this way and far that way, going onto one leg. So the base of support is large this way, which means there's a lot of room to absorb energy in this direction. My joint orientation, the angles of my joints, also matter because my ankle joint allows me to apply pressure with the ball of my foot, which can help counterbalance, especially in this position. My knees being able to bend allow me to drop my center of mass lower. Again, increases my resistance to disruption. So base of support in this direction is really, really good. It's maximal basically for this position. However, if you were to come over here and grab me with 2 fingers, here I can resist a full rugby charge. Bring it on. Over here, a little woman could grab me with 2 fingers and go and pull me over. Now, I have some degree of being able to drop lower, but my base of support, line up with the camera angle a little bit better. So this way my base is very long, lots of room to move. This way, I only have a small corridor or base of support that my center of mass can remain within. You can see I start to tip very easily. Even my heels start lifting. Even with counterbalancing, I don't have a lot of room, a lot of play. So my stability in this direction is far less than it is in this direction. Okay, so I wanted to make sure you understand. Stability is relative to orientation. It's relative to your base of support, the position of your center of mass. It's not just one quantity. The direction or vector of the force or disturbance also matters. How you're standing matters. How you adapt, how you move really matters. Your stability is changing moment to moment. Every positional change of your center of mass, every tensional change in your muscle, joint angle change, all of this is influencing your stability as you go through. It's a fascinating game. It's amazing stuff. For those of you that are interested in human movement, it's an amazing thing. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Like you looking at gymnasts and ballet dancers and any high-level proficient mover, it's you look at them and it's just wow. It's the level of neurological proficiency and skill and control in order to do what different people do. It's amazing. The amount of computing power in a changing, adaptive environment in such a short space of time.
The Toledo show. Taking the high line, you see the wind-up, the coil. As Toledo punting the section, finds it, goes to the air. A massive backside. Are you fully rotated?
document this stuff accurately it's almost impossible, but our brains do it to such degree of accuracy that a hockey player can slide on ice, moving at tremendous speed with remarkable amounts of mass and stop exactly where he wants, even though he's got to shave ice to stop and then change direction. You have gymnasts running and doing quadruple rotational spins and top over end somersaults and landing with precision and balance. It's remarkable. Human movement is absolutely amazing, and I hope that my passion for it hopefully sparks a little bit of an interest. This clip could have its own in-depth analysis, but I'm just going to do a simplified quick one for you to give you the main points. The point of contact between the two acrobats is the hand. That is the woman's base of support. Both performers need to make sure that the woman's center of mass remains above the base of support or she will fall. The woman needs to make sure that even though she's changing the shape of her body, the center of mass needs to remain in the same position or relatively close to the same position. The man's job is to provide as stable a base of support as possible, which he can adjust if need be. Any adjustments the man makes to the woman's base of support has to factor in a few key variables. Number one, he has to make adjustments slow enough that the inertia of the woman's body doesn't overcome her stability. In order to maintain stability, the woman needs to counteract the force of inertia through adaptive use of body tension and micro adjustments to her position. This happens both when she's accelerating and decelerating. Number two, he can't position her outside of his ability to bear her load. That is, he can't move her center of mass into a position outside of quality structural integrity. Alignment and joint angles greatly affect geometric strength. Without getting into more complex physics and mechanics, just know that the moment arm will drastically increase the torque necessary or the strength necessary to bear the weight if alignment breaks. A simple way that you can visualize this is imagine holding a 10 kg directly over your head with a straight arm. It's not too challenging, right? Now imagine holding that same weight parallel to the floor out to the side. It's way more difficult, right? If you've never tried this, try it. You will believe me. You will be a believer. Since the man has excellent structural alignment in his arm, this is the best position for his bones and joints to bear the load. In this alignment, his muscles only have to work to maintain the alignment. His arm is effectively a column bearing the weight, with the muscles acting as tension support cables keeping the column's structural integrity. In a later video, we'll discuss tensegrity and its relevance to human movement and martial arts, but for now, let's just keep on track balance and stability. One thing worth taking note of here quickly is notice how the female acrobat uses this hand to stabilize her body. This use of the arm as a support structure makes it much easier for her to initially stabilize and find her center of mass or a balance point before moving on with the routine. Alright, so here's one last video analysis before we move on. You'll notice that there are a lot of similarities in this video and the previous one. Primary difference being that the man is using a bent arm technique. This allows his base of support that he's offering to the cheerleader or the woman above him to be a lot more adaptable. It requires a lot more strength, but he uses both hands in most instances. And yes, this allows him to be a bit more adaptive in his assistance of her balance. The woman here is working on keeping her body tense for stability and maintains a fairly consistent point of center of mass, even when moving. One thing worth noting about the bent arm technique is it is far better suited for the popping motions being performed here. The previous clip demonstrated smooth, consistent transitions over relatively long periods of time, whereas in this video, emphasis is being placed on quick, explosive transitions. This bent arm technique puts far greater strain on the man's muscles, but it gives him room in his joints to extend, generating vertical force for throwing her up, and room for flexing in order to absorb her inertia when she comes back down due to gravity. The man is coordinating the same functions in his legs to greatly amplify this ability. I think you will agree it's a very impressive display of athleticism by both performers. It should go without saying, but the entire body needs to work in unity to perform these actions. Let's discuss these concepts by looking at simple and relatable movements. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the concept of center of mass and see how it applies to something relatable like walking. So we're going to have a look at two different types of walks. One might be called a martial arts walk. It's pretty much how you would walk if you think the ground's very slippery. If the ground is covered in ice, you're not going to do a forward-leaning walk like most people would generally do because your chances of slipping are extremely high. What you will do is you'll try automatically, if you're intelligent and you realize the circumstances, what you'll do is you'll keep your center of mass over your base of support to make sure you have maximal control of your balance. Then you'll place a foot, gaining another base of support whilst your center of mass is here. You'll then drive your weight onto your lead leg, your front leg, retract, lift, center of mass is still balanced, extend, center of mass is still balanced, back, extend, shift. Right, if the ground is very unstable, you might find you're taking very small, controlled steps. This is balancing your center of mass above your base of support at all times. In opposition to that, most people walk in a series of controlled falls. Your center of mass is actually constantly moving over your base of support onto an over. I'm falling, I catch, I'm falling, I catch, I'm falling, I catch. And this can be quite economical, especially if you bring into fact you've got fascial loading, elastic tissue loading in your body, you can recycle energy. There's reasons for these things, but I just wanted you to see how your center of mass moving over your feet in a walk like this can be very different of your power walk. So you can do a very explosive foot loading, really extend and drive through the feet using that fascial tension, loading the tissue, spring. So loading the tissue, spring. Another thing, that is very different to center of mass, balanced. Step, shift, center of mass, balance, shift, step, shift, center of mass, balance. This is a very different way of moving, but I just want you to see how the center of mass affects that type of movement and affects balance and affects stability. The more you understand this, the more mindful you are, the better awareness and control you have of this point, the better you're able to do everything. All sports, all human movements. It's even in airplane design, architecture, everything. It's a fundamental principle of mass and reality. So I know I'm hitting this over and over again, but I want you to understand this because it's really important and it's the foundation of learning so many things.
A stick or staff really helps visualize these concepts in practice.
So if you are struggling to visualize where the center of mass is in the body when the body is moving, this is a great visual aid to assist you in seeing where that is. So if the center of mass is in the middle of my body here, a little bit below my navel, remember it will move as my body changes shape. This I am going to try and position on my center of mass as it will be the vertical line, the line of gravity, connected to that point. Now obviously I can't put this inside my body to show exactly where the center of mass and line of gravity is, but it will be a good approximation. It will be a good way to see this. So if I put it in the middle, you can see my center of mass would be on this line. My balance point would be on this line. Line of gravity going through the center of mass vertically, showing where our balance point is. If the line of gravity is on our base of support, we'll be in balance. As it shifts out, we'll lose balance. The center of mass changes relative to our weight distribution and shape. So you can see my center of mass is here. I cannot lift either of my bases of support because I will fall because my center of mass is not directly over either one of them. If I want to be able to remove one of my legs as a base of support, I need to shift my center of mass to be able to maintain balance in this new position. As my center, so I can do this in a very controlled fashion, as seen here, shifting in a very controlled fashion, from one leg to the other. If I shift my center of mass outside my base of support, I'm going to fall. Now this obviously doesn't track 100% to the exact location of my center of mass because I can't put it inside my body for when it is inside my body, but it gives you a good visual aid of where your center of mass, line of gravity and pressure point, contact to the floor is, and where that is relative to your balance point Okay, so just a quick visual aid, hopefully that helps. Let's take a moment and refocus. Why are we learning this stuff? This knowledge can fast track our progress towards achieving elite level movement competence. By understanding the fundamentals of human movement, we can gain insight into a clear developmental path for ourselves as individuals. Lerdsila and Saenchai are world-class examples of what it is to be a masterful mover. Not only do they both have a truly remarkable understanding of balance and stability, but they have the ability to masterfully apply those principles in real time in a huge variety of ways whilst adapting to an opponent. Their understanding of movement fundamentals and movement patterns is nothing short of spectacular. Now, most professional fighters will build their entire fight strategy around one central stance. This is because it allows them to spend their time training, honing specific movement patterns and skills, techniques that move out of and back into that same stance. It's much easier to master specific movement skills and patterns around a central stance. Fighters like Saenchai and Lerdsila, however, have such a masterful understanding of movement in general that they can be far more adaptive and creative in their attack angles, movements, and stance changes. Building your fight strategy around a single stance is a viable game plan for your training. That being said, when you see a fighter like Saenchai or Lerdsila apply the same level of skill or even greater across multiple skill sets, the level of mastery is just apparent. It's beautiful. What are some strategies we can use to build our skills in balance and stability? Now, in a moment, I'll briefly introduce you to Tai Chi if you're not already familiar with it, and the reason I'm doing that is because as an individual movement practice, it explicitly demonstrates the concept of dynamic balance. So very useful in terms of learning balance and talking about it, and some great drills can be extracted from it to help you do any other sport or any other martial arts. Yoga is a practice that's been around for thousands of years, experimenting with human movement, balance, and stability. Qigong and Tai Chi are two derivative health practices that we're going to take a quick look at, as they have a very strong emphasis on harmonizing with your balance point dynamically through motion. Yoga as a practice is meant to serve the purpose of uniting the mind, body, and spirit. Now, there's a huge number of sub-variations and categories of both yoga and internal martial arts. Most of these have tremendous health value to offer, but we're just going to discuss Tai Chi briefly.
What is a Tai Chi? It's a very good combination of the physical movement and inner peace and tranquility. Tai Chi itself is a philosophical term. In Chinese character, one more dot than da, than big. So it means very big, supreme. Ji in here means principle. So Tai Chi can mean a supreme principle, or it's very similar to the way talked of by Lao-Tzu. So this is the great way, the universal law. It's not merely a form of a physical movement. So this is something combined internally and externally. A good balance of body and mind.
The practice of balance and controlling your center or your center of mass is deeply embedded in Tai Chi. When practicing Tai Chi, you spend a lot of your time developing this ability to shift your weight gracefully, but also with a great degree of control, from one base of support to two bases of support, forwards, backwards, twisting. It's about really getting in tune with your body and your center of mass and your balance and how that flows in movement, how changing the shape of your body and your form influences your center of mass, how to position your feet to create different bases of support, how to position your body and your form to keep your balance point, your center of mass, in a fluid, harmonious state that you remain in balance. From my personal experience studying and practicing Tai Chi, it seems to be about developing a harmonious flow, a dynamic dance or balance to control movement energy. It's a beautiful practice. The reason I've included Tai Chi in this video is because it explicitly embodies the concepts of balance and stability. Even just watching the practitioner for a moment, you can see him playing and dancing with these concepts, developing his intuitive body connection. Using the principles of balance and stability, we are now going to discuss stances in martial arts. Talking about balance and stability, this is an excellent time to start talking about stances. When you practice stances, you are creating a mental map of possible body positions. You are training your body's functional mobility by developing the attributes and skills necessary to hold positions as well as transition from them. You are identifying structural strengths and weaknesses of each position, and you are trying to understand their utility. You are internally cataloging the inherent balance, stability, and weight transfer limitations of each position, as well as their transitional movement potential. You're learning how to move. So training stances is a way to develop movement understanding. It's a very structured way to teach movement. The theory helps you understand the commonalities between things. It helps you establish patterns. When you can see the patterns, you can use that knowledge to learn new skills much faster. The point that I'm trying to make is once you understand the framework and you start to understand the relationship between the points of the framework, it gives you intuition. You can start being creative and adaptive. Just like one stance is a dot. When you understand 30 stances, you have all these dots that you can connect to, a framework. Once you understand how to transition between those stances and you understand the relationship between them and how movement moves between them and the strengths and weaknesses between them, you become a much more informed and educated mover. And this starts to give you the ability to complex problem solve and move in ways that you would otherwise not have the competence to do so. Alright, so in closing of this point, stances are very useful learning and teaching aids, but they need to be taught in conjunction with fundamentals of human movement and the context of the relationship they have with one another. So every stance I want you to think of as a configuration. It's an assembly of different pieces. It is a setup of a system, and that system is you, your body, your function in space and gravity. So every stance, being a configuration or a setup, has different strengths and weaknesses. Just like a ball has properties that it can roll, but it has almost no stability, and a table has the properties that it's very stable and you can put things on it. Your body and every stance you take has a configuration that allows you to capitalize on certain strengths whilst trying to avoid the weaknesses of it. So taking a look at this front stance, for example, I'm not going to get bunkered down in the nitty-gritty details because there's endless variations of how you can do these things. This is the front stance we're going to analyze. And what I want you to see is we have the base of support. I'm going to keep that fixed. I'm not going to move my feet for the sake of simplicity. So base of support, grounded there. First thing, base of support. Second thing, center of mass. Where is my center of mass relative to my base of support? Is it on the front side of it? Is it on the back side of it? We're assuming my line of orientation is this way for this purpose. So this is my front stance, front, that would be my back. So is my front stance front loaded, mid loaded, or rear loaded? What is my hip orientation? This is another important thing. So the first thing, base of support. Second thing, position or center of mass. Third thing we're going to look at is orientation. So to have a fixed point that we're discussing, we're going to take a look at your pelvis. So you have your pelvis, which is this bowl-like structure. You can imagine the center of your pelvis, the symphysis pubis. The center of your pelvis, if we had to drum a little ruler spike in there, I know it sounds terrible, but if we had to drum in a little spike there, that is at 90 degrees coming up from your pelvis, that would give us a line of orientation moving forward. That line also matters. So if my pelvis orientation is this way, this is different to if it's that way. Just as if I'm here, this is different to that. So pelvis orientation also really matters when we're moving. So going back to the front stance, I can shift my weight. This is one of the main pros of the front stance is there's a lot of room inside my base of support to shift forward and backwards, there's very little room to shift from side to side. So this makes spinning or looping attacks a lot less potent. Let me expand on what I was saying about spinning or looping or hooking attacks. So when you're standing in a front stance, a relatively long but relatively narrow front stance, you're orientated forwards, there is very little room to shift your center of mass from side to side. So that means you have very little room to generate momentum, which is mass times velocity. So you can't move your mass very far inside of this little space. The front stance is of course set up for forwards and backwards movement, especially when in a bladed stance as seen in fencing and classic style boxing. The stance is excellent for projecting your center of mass forwards and backwards. However, it leaves very little room to generate momentum side to side, which is why a more square stance or even a side stance allows much more room to accelerate your mass from side to side. So you pick the stance relative to what it is that you want to do with your center of mass, how you want to express your center of mass, and the type of strike trajectory that you want. So in conclusion, it's very difficult to generate lateral momentum in the front stance. You can hit with a decent amount of power utilizing rotation, but if you want your hooking strikes to have the kind of weight and knockout power that Mike Tyson had, then you want to be able to drive your center of mass further laterally and accelerate it, building more kinetic energy and momentum. You could if you stepped. So if you took a step into maybe a more square stance, you could translate or move your center of mass further, and if you do that explosively, you've got a lot of mass moving very quickly, accelerating quickly, reaching a high velocity, mass times velocity, more momentum. Okay. Whereas if I had a squared stance, wider stance, now I have more room to shift my center of mass from side to side. Again, the orientation matters because the center of mass, if we're looking at striking, so it's getting a little bit more in depth, but I think it's good to connect the relevance of these things. I've got my center of mass. If I throw a hook, for instance, if you're here, I want to move my center of mass from this side of your body to that side of your body in order to pull my center of mass and capitalize on effective mass, how much of my mass and how much momentum I'm using to hit you. So if I just hit here, my center of mass is staying on this side, that's an arm punch. I'm not going to have much impact. But if I use my hip orientation or my center of mass orientation and I shift it across, so now my center of mass, the position of my center of mass is on this side, I want to move it to this side, but I also want to take it from a forward orientation to a turned orientation. That way I'm using not only this lateral or sideways movement, I'm also using a turning movement. So I'm turning, so I'm shifting my hips and I'm turning my hips. I'm trying to orientate my hands correctly with my hips, but hopefully you get the idea. That way, when I'm this side, I'm going to exaggerate everything massively. So my center of mass is on this side. I shift my weight and rotate my hips, and this way I can get more energy, more momentum. You can do this in a very narrow stance. You can see my hands here, but what happens now is my hand will project forward and turn over almost like a spiral corkscrew motion. This is more of a pop. Same I can do my rear hand, can shoot forward and turn it out. I'm going to do it slowly. Boom. So the hook angle, the trajectory angle, and the impact angle is all different to if I have a wider stance and I swing all the way across. Boom, boom, boom. That is a completely different punch, using a different stance setup or a different base, because your base gives you how you can move your center of mass with balance. Stepping changes your base and changes how you can move your center of mass with balance and stability. Again, it's difficult to talk about these things without layering in their connection and their relationship because they all exist together. Hopefully you're following me. Okay, so if you stepped out into a more of a square stance, you could build more momentum into your horizontal strike. So strike moving in the horizontal plane. Most of your power, your punching power, momentum, and kinetic energy is going to come from rotating your center of mass inside your base of support. So you've got your 2 feet, you've got your stance, and you're going to pivot and rotate and whip your arm across, and that's going to create a horizontal strike. So we've got our power from our horizontal strike coming from rotation. We can, if we want to summate forces and make the blow more powerful without stepping, without gaining lateral or translation momentum, without getting momentum from shifting our center of mass sideways, stuck in this position. So if we're staying in this forward orientated position, narrow stance, long stance, front stance, to get more power, more momentum into the strike, we can either sink down and extend and explode up with our legs, maybe doing triple extension. So most of the extension power is going to come from the legs, probably ankles, knees, hips, and even the spine. Every joint can get involved. Even every vertebra of the spine, especially thoracic spine, can extend a little bit. You can extend through your joints. This extension is going to create a rising force and lift your center of mass and lift your strike. So if you angle from going from a horizontal strike, again, we don't have, if we're in a narrow stance, we don't have much room to shift across from side to side. So we're getting most of our power coming from this horizontal rotation. But if we rise and hit upwards, so let's say we're in a lower position, so we're crouched down, we can explode up and hit at an angle. So hitting at an upward rising angle, it's still, so now we're hitting on an oblique angle. So rather than just getting rotation force from here, if we drop into a crouched position and explode and extend up, we can hit on an oblique angle and gain extension power from our legs, explosive muscular extension power. We could even do a plyometric bob down, low ground reaction force with gravity, whoop, and then pounce up and turn over and hit at an oblique angle. So this is one way we could even use gravity. So going to gravity, so we could explode up using muscular explosive force, or we could drop down, which I just mentioned now, to load the ground reaction force, to load elastic tissue. So as you drop, as you fall, as you flex your joints, so flexing your joints, everything's going to drop down. You're going to go into a fall state that will allow your center of mass to accelerate in gravity. Now you could immediately hit with that acceleration with that drop and go drop and hit on an oblique angle down. So as, let's say you're in a high stance, and as you throw your hook, you turn it over and you drop your center of mass down, you're getting gravitational acceleration. So you're getting your rotational power and your dipping, dropping power, and your strike trajectories going to end up going out from the rotation and down from the drop. So it's going to end up being an oblique angle down strike, and that can hit harder. So that's one way to use gravity. The other way, which I mentioned, of the muscular strength and the gravitational strength, is if you go from a high position to a low position, so gravitational acceleration to load fascia, load elastic tissue, ground reaction force, spring back up, and then you're hitting on the oblique angle up again. So you could hit oblique angle up or oblique angle down through explosive muscle power through the legs or through gravitational acceleration. Okay, so those are three ways you could get more power, more momentum into your strike using gravity, extension, and flexion rather than just rotation. Because again, if we don't step out, we don't have much room to shift or translate our center of mass to build momentum that way. So these are other ways we can summate forces to hit more powerfully with more momentum, more opportunity to develop more kinetic energy. So kinetic energy, more mass, traveling faster, more kinetic energy. So we've got momentum, mass times velocity. We've got kinetic energy, I think it's half mass times velocity squared. So more important on the velocity side of things, but we need mass and velocity for both of these. They're both good, just kinetic energy needs speed. Speed is even better. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about that now. That's another subject for later in the video, another video. Cool, cheers. Talking about the stance configurations, they all serve a different function or a different purpose. So there's a lot of people that try to say or want to know what is the correct way to stand, and it depends. There is no one right way, and that is because it depends on the situation. It depends on your body type, for one thing. If your body proportions, length, and weight distribution change, so there is no one right way for everyone to do it. There's no one size fits all. You have to adapt these concepts and principles to you. You need to make it your own, literally. You need to adapt it and tailor it to you. So a good coach should be able to teach you these principles, but you need to make it your own. You need to adapt it to your body, your style, the way you move, the way you manipulate energy, the way you move momentum. You have to make it your own. Okay, so So to give you some guidelines on how long your stance should be, a rough guideline might be the length of your shin. So if you ground the ball of your foot and run the length of your shin and your knee to in line with your other ankle or heel, that will give you a good approximate length for how long your stance should be. Now, this will vary again depending on your leg length and depending on how much mobility and stability you want. So the properties of what you're trying to get out of your stance will change depending on your stance length and your stance width. So I figured let me just give you a quick breakdown of why this equilateral triangle is such a solid home base position. I like to call it a home base position, and it's because it gives you an excellent foundation with your feet. So your base of support and the angles that your legs are relative to your center of mass. So the edges of your base of support, the angle from there to your center of mass really matters, because that determines how the ground reaction force, so when you push into the ground, how that moves your center of mass. If your feet are too far under you, like directly under you, you go up and down when you straighten and bend your legs. They're very far to the side, they push you from side to side. Obviously you don't want to go too far because you don't have enough knee bend to actually get good extension, or I don't want to get too far into the details of that. But this setup that I'm showing you with the equilateral triangle, it is widely or universally considered the best setup to have multi-directional potential, movement potential. So you can move forwards, backwards, left and right, because the angle of your feet relative to your center of mass give you a good drive angle to move. So I'm fully aware that I'm comparing the universal athletic position to a front stance, and I'm doing this intentionally. All right, so the universal athletic position is square. So you can think of your shoulders and your hips are facing on forwards and your feet are out to the side, all right? Again, this gives you that good drive angle from your feet, from your base of support. That equilateral triangle gives you the drive angle to your center of mass from the ground. Ground reaction force allows you to push. All right, so the reason that the universal athletic position is really good is it gives you omnidirectional movement potential. You can move in any direction. You can move up, down, left, right if you need to. You can step forward, step back. It's a very good middle ground for everything. All right, so the front stance, you can utilize the same principles of ground reaction force and angle of drive. You're just stepping forward with one leg. When you step forward with one leg, you're taking some of that omnidirectional properties out of the stance, and you're orientating yourself in a specific direction. You're becoming more of an arrow. Just like an arrow points in a direction, by stepping forward, you're pointing yourself in a direction. So now your front stance still has that equilateral, or close to, it's a guideline, close to that equilateral triangle position, but only front to back, which gives you the ground reaction force angle to drive forwards and backwards. Because you're stepping forward, you're probably going to narrow your stance a little bit, so you're not going to have the same amount of side-to-side drive. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify, we're using the same principles of angle of drive from the ground to your center of mass. Universal athletic position square, front stance, you're orientating yourself into a specific direction, but you're still using the same concept of how you're driving your center of mass. Now, you can stand very tall. Standing very tall with a narrow or shorter stance allows you to drive your center of mass up and down easier. So, for example, if you're throwing uppercuts, it's more useful to be able to lift your center of mass than it is to be able to drive your center of mass forward. You're trying to create an upwards force. So the expression of your center of mass going up is more important. Same as if you're doing a dropping elbow, being able to drive yourself forward doesn't really help the angle or the trajectory of your strike. Contrary to that, or in contrast to that, if you're throwing like a dropping straight right to the solar plexus, you want to have lateral drive. I know I said dropping, you do want to be able to drop a little bit, but the emphasis is going to be driving your center of mass in a straight line. You're trying to penetrate forward. So now having your feet longer or further apart allows you to get a better angle to drive your center of mass forward to throw the right hand into the solar plexus, let's say. Same concept would be for a front kick. If your feet are very close together, you don't have a good angle of drive to get a very effective angle to throw your front kick in. Spinning back kick, any straight linear strike, a wider stance is you want a stance wide enough to get a good angle of drive to back that strike up, to really give that strike's trajectory good drive. You want to drive your center of mass in that direction to create momentum. Okay, so how your feet are set up is going to determine how you can move your center of mass, and that's going to determine in what direction your momentum is moving in. Okay, so let me end that off there. I know this is fairly complicated stuff and we could talk for a very long time, but let me stop there. I made some of the most important points there for you. Obviously, you can specialize your stance to sacrifice. So if you go more narrow, you're not going to be able to drive left and right as effectively, but you'll be able to drive forward and backwards more effectively, and you can have more reach. You can expand and reach from your center further because you can counterbalance in the opposite direction. So stance properties will determine what the stance is good and bad for, but this equilateral triangle position is really sound and solid as a home base position to start from. From there, you can I recommend everyone starts there and then expands out. If you're doing a very specialized sport that requires a different stance, sure, that's another story. Like, you're not going to stand in a square stance in fencing. It's almost, I won't say you would never do it, but chances are very slim you won't. It's just not situationally and circumstantially optimal for what the goal is. Okay, so let me not rant on too much there. I think that summarizes in brief, why this equilateral triangle position is a sound, athletic, universally athletic position for multi-directional movement, good stability, and let's see, and also it gives you good attack reach on all your limbs. So let me throw that in as well. So you can hit with your left, your right, left and right arms and legs. Okay, I could build on this, but no, let's try keep it short and sweet. Okay, cheers. At this stance length, I have a good amount of space to transfer my weight inside my base of support. So I have a good overall balance and stability, so I can generate power quite nicely inside of this. And I can also, something that's quite nice, is I can shift my weight. So with my foot flat, I can shift my weight just to my center of mass and my line of gravity, just outside my lead foot. But if I drive with the ball of my foot, I can actually get my center of mass on top of this foot. Now that is significant because it allows me to go from a double base of support to a single base of support very rapidly and very effectively, very efficiently and in a controlled manner. Whereas if I have a very long stance, this might give me more stability and more room to move inside of my stance. I can shift my center now further. I can really load up back here and okay, but there is no ways I can do a full weight transfer and get onto this leg unless I really now I need to start leaning my upper body like crazy to actually get my center of mass to the point that it's over this foot. Because even with this crazy forward lean, look what happens when I lift that foot. Oh, okay, if I really load up this leg, I can hold this position and I can shift and come up onto one leg. If I go even wider, sometimes I said bouncing up here, but to transfer to this one leg, it becomes more and more difficult to get here. And even once I'm here, I have this leg that's far extended from my center that I now need to compress back to my center to be able to move. Whereas if my stance is very short, I'm going to go even shorter now, I can shift, boom, I'm on this leg. I'm on this leg. I'm on this leg. I'm on this leg. And you see Thai fighters use this strategy because it's only a very small transfer of weight. And bam, okay, that's more of a karate snap kick. But I'm just trying to illustrate the point that you can shift your weight very quickly onto one leg or the other the closer your feet are together, because your center of mass doesn't have to travel that far. If your feet are close, center of mass is on this leg, center of mass is on that leg. If my feet are together, it's so subtle you can barely see it. But if it's big, trying to get my center of mass over here, it can be very challenging. So that will slow you down. It will change options. So the ability to shift from one leg to the other leg and do steps and shifts, that is much easier on a narrower stance. So every stance is a configuration. Every stance has properties. It has pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. I can't go into all of them because that would take hours, but that's where training comes in. You spend a bit of time with each position, you train it, you get a feel for it, you realize what it's good for, what it's bad for, how to use it with your body dimensions, how to use it with energy and momentum, and that's how you develop skill. Alright, so I'm going to end this off there. I'd love to talk about it more, but again, I'm trying to keep this video as short and condensed as I can. It was originally meant to be 10 minutes. It's probably going to be an hour. So I was going to save this next part for a later video, but I decided it was really important to give you this added context to the nature of movement now. So we're going to connect stances to movement and movement to gracefulness. Now, this is actually very important, so I recommend you listen up. So a skilled athlete or a fighter is graceful. Now, many people don't think of a fighter as graceful, but a good mover is graceful, and I'm going to expand on that for you now. So movement executed gracefully is fluid and seamless in quality. Obtaining the state requires both physical skill and a balanced mindset. The mind has to enter a state between impulsive and compulsive movement, so often referred to as flow state. Not too orderly and not too chaotic, just right to harmonize with the moment. Skill takes time to develop, and in more complex movements, it is helpful to break down the complexity of movement into manageable parts for the individual practitioner to process. Okay, so you can't learn everything all at once, so stances are very useful to break down movement, which is pretty much infinitely complex, into manageable pieces. And then we can chunk that up and build it back up into efficient movement later. Good coaching finds the zone of proximal development for each practitioner or student. The zone of proximal development is the very edge and just beyond what your current ability is. It's the uncharted zone of new development that you could navigate at your current skill level with a little added guidance. Okay, so our developmental goals need to take us to the edge of our ability, to the edge of our competence. They need to stretch us a little bit into the unknown. This process repeated over and over is how we develop as human beings. Actively problem solving at the edge of our ability is how we expand the edge of that ability. It's how we grow our competence. Okay, so going back to stances. Stances are a way to break down the practically infinite possibility of movement into a simplified framework with fixed markers. This helps the practitioner or student get their bearings. It gives you an anchor point. It gives you a starting point. It gives you a point that you can build from and connect to and relate things to. You have to have some order. If everything is too chaotic, you can't get a handle of it. It's just anxiety provoking and stressful, and you'll quit. If there's not enough order for you to get a structure going to associate things to, you can't make progress. All right, so let me just jump back into my notes. Stances are path markers. They are not the path. Too many traditional styles get way too caught up in the stance. Stances are learning aids. They are teaching aids to movement. So stances you can think of lanterns on the mountainside. They are not the mountain itself. They are learning aids, they are guides, they are tools. So let's quickly summarize all of what we've just gone through. We train stances because movement is infinitely complex. We can't learn everything all at once. We can't talk about everything all at once. We need to break it down into manageable parts that we can communicate, process, and practice. We then build those parts up. We chunk together information. So we learn one stance, another stance, another stance. We can chunk those stances together. That becomes a very efficient movement. Then we can build that up into complex creative movement as our competence builds. So stances are learning aids to build our movement competence. So yes, human movement is very complicated if you didn't know. So stances are a way to help us teach it and learn it and practice it. Let's quickly talk about rotation. So again, rotating with a wide base, I have a lot of mass that's far away from my center. This creates a large moment of inertia. And to illustrate this point very quickly, if you stand with your arms wide like this, and you try and move as fast, it's very difficult to move back and forth. If you put your hands close here, left, right, left, right, left, right. Same thing, I show left, right, and it's way more energy. This is because the further away your mass is away from your center, the more energy it takes to try and maintain the same amount of speed or velocity. It's angular velocity. So I don't want to get too technical, but the further your limbs are away from your center, the harder it is to rotate. So if you've got a wide stance like this, you're not going to rotate like this. You would want to come in tight and rotate and expand. So you would compress, coming close to your center. This, so you start your energy, tighten up, rotate fast, and then expand out. Alright, so in a moment I'm going to show you some actual spinning elbow footage where these concepts are being applied in competitive fights. The reason I'm doing this is I want you to see how these fundamental concepts are applied. So the first spinning elbow was actually done by Iswandile. It's actually a friend of mine, a guy I trained with back in South Africa. Great person, excellent fighter, very creative, very talented. And he does a very unorthodox thing. He actually steps across, well, I'll tell you what, let me start you with what normally happens. That's a better place, easier place to start. So with a spinning strike, what usually happens is the fighter will step across with their lead side and spin and hit with the rear side elbow, rear side arm, rear side leg. So this is how a spinning strike is normally executed. It's normally executed stepping across with the lead or front side, spinning and hitting with the rear side. What he does is very creative, and it was highly effectual in this instance, and so it's usually, it would be way harder to pull off, but he pulled it off, is he threw his combination and he stepped across with his rear side and spun and hit with his lead side. So highly unorthodox, but again, it follows the same concept. The execution is a little bit different, but we're still following the same concept of angular momentum, conservation of angular momentum. It's using leverage, moment arms. It's all the same basic building blocks. It's just executed differently. So I'm going to throw that up for you just so you can see it. So yeah, you know, a lot of these things you need to stop, pause, look at it, rewatch it, think about it, because you really need to ingrain these concepts into your mind. Because yeah, it takes a bit of time now, but it will save you. It took me thousands of hours to figure this stuff out, basically. So if you could figure it out in an hour or 2 hours or a day or a week or even a month, it's still going to be a great return on your investment in the long run, if this is something you really want to get into. Okay. Figure skate dancers and gymnasts are excellent examples of this, dancers as well. So again, it's just another point of the significant different properties of your stances. How much drive you have is another huge variable. If you're up high, your center of mass is stacked almost vertically above your legs, it's very little energy to be here. Your bones are almost vertically stacked. Your bones are carrying most of your weight. Your muscles have to do very little. You can transfer your weight from side to side, from foot to foot. You can rotate, spin, round kick, just like Thai fighters do. But you don't have a good angle of drive. Just like if someone were to run and push me or run and tackle me, I'll go over very easy because I don't have the right angle to resist them. Now I've got a good angle to resist them. That same angle that allows me to resist them is also an angle that allows me to project energy forward. So I might be able to rotate very effectively here, but I can't expand my energy out that well. Yes, I can rotate. Bam, 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 bam. Almost all my energy is coming from rotation. I can rotate a drop, bam, bam. But there's less room for movement of the position of my center of mass, which creates a lot of momentum, a lot of energy, a lot of effective mass, which adds a lot of power. So there's a lot of different ways to hit, a lot of different mechanisms and ways of adding force together from different systems, different ways to summate forces to create a powerful blow. So coming back here, wide stance gives me a lot of room to transfer from the back end to the front end. That's why a baseball pitcher might be from the back, expand out, pitch, uses a large stance. Okay, so talking about weight transference, angles of drive, of course, angle of drive. Having this angle of drive, just like a sprinter will come up into this angle to drive forward. The angle that you apply force matters. Applying force at this angle, if I apply a lot of force at this angle, I'll knock myself over. If I apply a lot of force at this angle, there's no way I'm going to get knocked over. I'm locking my structure and my angle. I'm becoming a buttress. Okay, so yeah, there's also some other points about rotation, and how the angles matter. I'm not going to rant on too much, but there's just a lot of ideas popping into my head, and I'm trying to bring them together and connect the dots for you guys. Hopefully I'm doing a good job of that. If I'm not, feel free to ask me some questions and I'll try expand on these things, because each of these individual things took me a long time to learn. Don't worry if you don't understand it straight away. I'm just trying to help you learn it a hell of a lot faster and a hell of a lot easier than I had to. I figured I would give you some examples of the utility of stances. So every stance has its pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. If we take a look at a side stance like this, my feet are facing this way, my opponent would be here. This stance, you don't want to have too narrow. The main function of the stance is to give you an angle of drive from your connection points to the floor, i.e. your feet. You want to have a nice angle of drive from there to your center. So you're connecting your feet to your center here, which allows you to have a good drive angle to move yourself laterally. Boom, 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 boom. This allows you to be very mobile side to side. It is quite useful for long range strikes, so a long range flicker jab, pop and out, pop and out. Got a nice side kick over here. You can throw a nice side kick, snap side kick, spinning side kick, back from the other side. So I'm not going to be too explosive in kicks now, I haven't warmed up or anything. But yeah, so you've got these side angle attacks. One drawback from this compared to, say, a lunging forward stance. So let's go into, it's very similar to a classic boxing stance or a fencing stance, where you bring your back leg, your rear leg out maybe 90 degrees. This can vary a little bit, and straight. So this will vary depending on your hip structure, your stance length, and what you're wanting to do with your rear hand as well. That also really comes into play. Because the more you turn this foot back, the more you can drive forward nicely, and the more you can sit your center of mass back onto this rear leg, which can be useful, especially going back onto this leg and throw snap kicks. There's utility to that, but you're turning this hip back further and this shoulder back further, bringing your rear hand further and further away from your opponent, which makes it much harder to reach them. So you're probably only going to be able to hit your opponent with this as a counter if they step into your range, boom. And even then, it naturally wants to pivot and turn over, because keeping this foot back like this, it messes up the kinetic chain. There's a correlation, there's a relationship between the ball of your foot, your heel, your knee, your hip, your shoulder, and you know how that moves up through your hip, through your spine. Everything wants to rotate and twirl and move and spin. So there's naturally this, you want to have this spinning action on your right hand. That's why a square stance naturally brings your right hand closer to your opponent, and it makes it much easier to throw the right hand. You're in a position that you can pop your right hand off, pop, 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 and have good reach with it. Whereas back here, you're squared up, your shoulders are facing this way. In order to get the reach of your shoulders, you need to get your shoulder this side, which means you need to turn the hip over, which means you need to turn the foot over to actually get that reach. So yeah, side stance, it's good for some things, it's good for this lateral mobility, it's good for getting a nice angle of drive from your feet to your center to move in and out, but it limits your options for round kicks on this side, even straight kicks on this side, with this right hand. But because it's taking you further and further this way, it starts actually making it easier to get this back leg kick. So from a square stance this side, it's actually quite difficult to get a spinning back kick off on this leg, because I need to get it all the way behind my lead leg, which requires me to either throw a kick with this one to step over, which now can allow, like it opens up the channel for me to be able to, from square, to throw over, now I can open up that channel to get this leg back and through. But if you're in a side stance, this foot is already almost past your lead foot. So it only takes a small little step and you've got a corridor that you can fire that leg through. So every stance has strengths and weaknesses. Its inherent structure puts you in a position that's good for some things and bad for some things. So it's just to start to identify the pros and cons of each position, what it loads you up for, how does it affect your reach on your different attack limbs. Each limb has a different reach that correlates to your stance, how your base is set up, how your center is, how your orientation of your pelvis is set up. That changes your reach on all of your limbs. Where your weight is will also change, what you can do with your legs. For example, if I put all my weight on this leg, I can't use this leg to kick. But if I put my weight on my rear leg, shift my center of mass back, now I can lift this leg. Boom, boom, you see? So how your feet are set up, the angle of your feet relative to your opponent, angle of your pelvis, your line of orientation from your pelvis. So base of support, feet set up, feet angle, feet width creates different drive angles. If you're stacked up high, you have a very poor angle to be able to drive with your legs. You can see, I bend and straighten my legs, what am I doing? My center is going up and down. I'm driving my center of mass up and down. If I widen my feet a little bit and I bend and I straighten, what happens to my center of mass? It's now moving more side to side in a curve like this, boom, boom. So angle of drive really matters on your feet. If you want to have nice quick switches on your kicks, a tight stance works, because you're not going to be using large lateral shifts of your center of mass. It's a small lateral shift to get your weight onto that leg, so you can bring the kick around on the other side. So I can throw right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg, right leg, right leg. So if your feet are close together, it becomes easy to switch where your center of mass, which leg your center of mass is using as a base of support. So yeah, short stance, good for kicking. Wider stance, it's better for boxing. Got more room to shift your center of mass. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, definitely recording good. So you got there more room to shift your center of mass as you widen up a bit on your stance. This allows you to generate more power. So we've got summation of force. We've got force coming from shooting or moving our center of mass. Here, my line of orientation is this way, my opponent is here. So I'm creating energy and momentum by shifting my center of mass here. And if I'm throwing my right hand, I can transfer weight from the back to the front and rotate and spiral and extend. And I can have stance that helps me generate momentum. Now, tactics and strategy, this starts becoming, there's layers and layers of this stuff. We can't talk about everything at once, so let's just talk about the movement potential. You could have, the side-to-side movement and then plant this foot and pivot into it. So from bouncing back, load, and then bounce forward and pivot this foot and then spin and rotate. Pop, pa, pop, 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 pop. And you're changing different stances, so you're switching from side stance, it's like a fencing stance, to a square stance, to be able to use short, tight combinations of both sides of your body. This side, if you tighten up your stance orientation like this, your angle of effective scope, your scope of orientation is what I like to call it. Your scope of orientation is quite narrow. You're like a sniper here. You're only really effective here because your stance is so narrow that you can't shift your weight. I mean, I can counterbalance like crazy to be able to shift forward and back, but I can't shift like this kind of shift this way because I'm very narrow on my stance. So to generate any kind of momentum in this direction just doesn't work. The stance doesn't allow it. So if you're a bit square, now you've got this angle that your base of support is angled like this. So it's slightly side, you're traveling on two dimensions. You're traveling forward and back and side to side. This opens up different mechanical possibilities based on how you can generate momentum with your center of mass. All right, so we touched on a lot of things here. Touched on the fact that if you're very square up, it's going to affect your range, coming back to range. If your foot here is facing forward, okay, so let's go back to side, the knee bends this way, not that way. So you can only get your center of mass so far before it doesn't want to go more. You're going to blow out the tendons on your knee, ligaments on your knee. If you turn your foot out the other way, now look, my center of mass doesn't just stop here. I can get my center of mass way down here, which is what wrestlers use to do a penetration step and sink down and fire in and catch their opponents. So what you do with your foot changes what you can do with your center of mass. So all of these things correlate. There's a relationship between all these things. But you want to think, base of support, angles of feet, hips, orientation of hips, where your center of mass is, what are you doing with your center of mass to create momentum. You can create whipping actions to generate momentum, and then create what you would call a mechanical wave acceleration, where you're firing a lot of effective mass, and you actually create a back pull on that. You are basically transferring momentum from your lower body, locking the upper body, the lower body down to accelerate the kinetic energy moving into your arms. So you're actually hitting with less mass on a strike like that than compared to this. That has, the second one will have more momentum, but the first one will have more kinetic energy. Because kinetic energy has a stronger correlation with velocity than it does with mass. So momentum, mass times acceleration, kinetic energy, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it has a stronger correlation factor with speed. So kinetic energy, speed is more important. That's why bullets rip people apart, and a bowling ball rolled slowly can have pretty much the same momentum as a bullet, but it doesn't have nearly the same kinetic energy. So I'll throw some info up for you guys to expand on that a little bit, which is also really interesting because they're not the same thing. Right, but I'm not firing off ideas here. Let me just check if there was anything else I wanted to touch on for you guys. So we talked about foot angle, angle of drive, orientation, scope of orientation, line of orientation. Punching versus kicking on different stances. I mean, right there in this couple minutes, I don't know how long it's been, but I've tried to break down for you stuff that took me years to get a handle on mentally, to understand what's going on. Because so many different styles will say one thing and another thing, and this is right and that's wrong, and this is the only right way to do it, and that's bullshit. And there's so much misinformation out there, and gym politics, and style politics, and coach ignorance. So I'm just trying to give you the facts, guys. Understand human movement, the fundamental principles of human movement. Take that and layer it into your own movement style and your martial arts style, and apply the principles to your strategic elements and how you want to fight, and how you're going to counteract your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, and amplify your own strengths and minimize your own weaknesses. So it becomes a game of skill and intelligence in applying these principles in creative, dynamic, adaptable ways. Anyway, Coach Stephen.
Hey guys, so I salute you. Well done for getting to the end of the video. You must be passionate about human movements and martial arts. And yeah, I'm glad to be able to share my knowledge with you. I'm always learning, studying, and trying to upgrade my knowledge so I can help you guys learn as well. A lot of the stuff that I shared with you took me many, many years, many injuries, many trainers, studying in many countries, different styles, different coaches. So yeah, I try to take all of that and find what the common links are, what the first principles are, what the fundamental principles are, what the axioms are, what is it that really connects everything and makes it work. And yeah, these are fundamental human movement concepts. Apply them to your martial arts and it will upgrade your game. You'll move better, you'll perform better, you'll have less injuries, you will improve across time better. Anyway, you get it. I've spoken a lot about it in the video. There's many other topics we need to cover, guys, or girls, ladies and gentlemen. We still need to touch on a few things. We need to go into a little bit more depth on, the angular momentum, conservation of angular momentum, the difference between momentum and kinetic energy, and how your strike depth, so snapping strikes versus follow through strikes. If I'm just having a quick snap, that might be very effective for the jaw or the nose, but if I'm striking and I need a very fast, rapid energy transference on a quick strike like that, will have a higher proportional kinetic energy, but lower proportional momentum. And that's actually a good thing, because we're looking for fast energy impulse transference. So basically we're looking for a rapid snapping action to either break the nose or cause the head to jerk and whip quickly. Whereas if you're striking to the body or something, that's not the action you want. If you're striking into the meatia, having this rapid whipping strike kind of just the surface of your meat and your fat and your muscle. There's no real damage. Might bruise the local tissue right on the surface, but that's not going to do much. So the strike biomechanics, the depth of penetration, the impulse all needs to change. So you need, instead of having this very shallow depth of penetration, or impact and whipping in and out, you now need a longer sinking in. That depth of penetration is now going to allow you to transfer energy further in, so you'll be able to create more deformation and displacement of your opponents. You might push them back more, or you might deform their body, sinking into their organs more. So this depth of penetration is also another thing we really need to discuss. The striking biomechanics change. A punch isn't just a punch, a kick isn't just a kick. The way you move will determine if it's a snap, bop, bop, versus these two very different kicks. One has a shallow snap, one has a strong depth of penetration. One has a higher peak and exponential acceleration, increase in velocity. They'll have a higher kinetic energy upon impact, pop, more of a whoop than a snap. The other one has a little bit more of a linear progression. There's a rapid acceleration, but on impact, the energy transference is more of there's a drag on the energy on the end. So you're sacrificing a bit of impact velocity, but you're gaining depth. You're gaining depth of penetration to move that energy further into your opponent to get that deformation and that displacement. Again, I don't want to rant too much on and about it, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea. There's a lot more that we need to go into. I did take a couple notes here. So strike trajectory is another thing, the angle of your strike relative to your center of mass. So is it a rising strike relative to your center of mass? Is it a dropping strike relative to your center of mass? Because that expression of your center of mass will also come into play, because do you need to rise and lift to give your strike that extra oomph? Pop, 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 like pop. Or is it more of a drop, Is your center of mass coming up and down? So your strike trajectory really matters. Hopefully I'm losing track of my framing. Hopefully I'm still in frame for you guys. So I'll throw, down, up. So, what's happening with your center of mass will already have a strong influence on your strike trajectory. So strike trajectory is another big thing. Penetration, impulse transference, what contact surface you're using. Are you using a hard, bony, small area? What is the durability of that bone? If you're hitting your knuckle into the guy's elbow, the durability of your knuckle is going to lose to the durability of his elbow. Same to the top of his skull, your knuckle's probably going to lose. So you've got to match the right strike surface to the right strike target, and then you've got to match the right mechanics to have the right type of momentum or kinetic energy to maximize the desired result, be it greater depth penetration or more rapid energy transference. So again, let me end it off there. I hope you're enjoying my content. Study hard, practice martial arts, practice human movement, develop yourself, develop your character as well. It's not enough to just learn how to fight. You need to learn how to be a better person, because learning how to fight without becoming a better person just makes you a misery. It makes you a burden to the world. And a martial artist should be someone that's a pillar of the community. So don't forsake the benefit of morals and virtues and becoming a better person, because that's far more important than being able to fight, in all honesty. But yeah, I love martial arts, and let me not preach to you. I think you get it. Don't be a dick. Anyway, go well, do well. Cheers.